Prior to the news of fraud charges being laid against Finance Minister Gordhan, the minister undertook the task of convincing the global community of South Africa's economic and financial health, as well as to defer against any further ratings agency downgrades. And he was joined by the President of Business Unity of South Africa, Mr. Jabu Mabuza. The Telkom Chairman, alongside 80 other business CEOs, stood in support of the minister and vowed to march alongside Pravin Gordhan as he was set to face charges of fraud tomorrow. The charges now have been dropped and with little to no believable justification, and have had a damning effect on the South African economy as well as Brand SA ahead of a possible December ratings downgrade. Jabu Mabuza joins us to discuss the current South African political and economic situation and where those in power have failed the country and its people. And most importantly, we are going to look at how to get the ship back onto the right path again. Tate Jabu Mabuza.
Tim Modise.
Pleasure to have you with us, my brother. Much appreciated that you could make time to be with us. We've been talking about this away from the show for some time. Your involvement about the possible downgrade, and of course you sprang into action then when the former minister Nhlanhla was dismissed, and we had all kinds of things going on with the financial markets. What kind of situation are we in? Because, you know, I'll come back to the NPA story, but probably we don't appreciate the situation we're in that has led to you and other people to accompany Pravin Gordhan to travel around the world.
You know, Tim, the situation we're in is a very difficult one. The situation we're in the macro sense, to start with, gets complicated by we haven't had growth globally for some time. In South Africa, we kind of got a bit of a masking from the 2008-2009 global financial meltdown. We have survived that, which speaks of the resilience that was in our economy and built up before then. But it just was a tail. It's a lag. Our situation gotten worse when commodity prices, as a net exporter of raw material, started to drop. And also the drought has not helped. We've also made some policy decisions that was not very helpful in the area of tourism on the immigration front. And indeed, the whole question of our minerals policies also did not help. So that coupled with other policy missteps, the one you referred to as to how we handled the change of ministers of finance has not helped. But that also, you know, South Africa, we always, when we're in real dire straits, in the most difficult times, that's when we find unity of purpose. Diversity always, and I think it was you whom I like to quote on this many years ago. You spoke about through diversity you get tossed overboard, you swim or you sink. If you did swim ashore, then diversity was good. So we always find ourselves in those situations. But this time around, with no growth out there, losing our rating, which is the basis on which creditors decide whether we are willing, able, and have the wherewithal to pay their debt. They look at what rating agencies say about whether you will pay me or not pay me. Tim, you would not lend your money to anybody who is patently unable to pay you. Now, we do have a lot of our own resources. We're generating our own revenue, we're generating our own taxes. But if you don't have growth, chances are that companies are going to be less profitable, therefore they will pay less tax. People are going to be less employed, therefore they will not have income. The consequence is that gap between money that we raise of our own resources and money we need to borrow. The higher your borrowing costs go, the more you're going to have to cut your cloth and reduce other things. Currently, our debt services are a very big number. The minister told us the other days that is in the trillions what we owe. So having said that, the issue of our debt rating, put simply, a golfing mate of mine who's a pensioner now, who's drawing from his pension, tells me that between December 2015 and February 2016, his pension value dropped by 40%, having worked for 40 years. That is 16 years of your working earnings. So everybody and anybody, whether you've got cash or you've got an insurance policy or you've got your pension, if the downgrade comes about, you are gonna be affected. It's gonna cost you more. You will lose more of what you currently have.
I'll come back to this in a moment. I just wanted to give context, so to speak, because there are people who wondered why people like yourself, your organization, Business Unity South Africa, and many other prominent South Africans, politicians and public figures, came to the side of Pravin Gordhan and said we're all equal before the law, when the NPA said that it was going to charge him with the commission of fraud. And I've had other people come on the show talk about that and saying there was no case here. You know, I don't know, it's been said for months, by the way. And to hear the leader of the NPA, the chief of the NPA, Shaun Abrahams, yesterday admit to the fact, only 2 days before the court, which was going to take place tomorrow, was, you know, baffling. That what was the point all along? How did you feel when you saw Shaun Abrahams say he's no longer going to charge Pravin Gordhan?
Tim, I think one needs to look at how I felt having just arrived from New York, from what I think was a great South Africa of tomorrow's investors conference. In discharge of the work that the CEO initiative, as mandated and directed by the president, the work I'm doing with Minister Gordhan, on behalf of government, me on behalf of business and the leaders of labor, is work that I have been assigned by the president to do, to try and turn our economy around. The day before we went to New York, we had a meeting with the president, and the president had asked that South Africans must start to mind our language, we must lower the temperature on the political commentary that we so colloquially refer to as the political noise. He had asked South Africans to do that. So we went to New York. We come back. A few days after we returned from New York, the NPA calls this big conference to announce that the Minister of Finance is charged with fraud. Now, Tim, I can't think of anything worse. It's similar to you telling me that the head of my church is being charged of rape. When you make those statements, given that you hold a responsible position, there has to be the assumption that you've done your work. To come back having your action, your statement, having wiped billions of value out of the South African economy, to come back and say, yeah, I actually don't think. He's a lawyer. I dropped out of law school, so I'm not a lawyer. He's a lawyer. For fraud to be committed, there must be intent. So you use that word as a lawyer, knowing, to come back and say, no, there was no intent, they did not have the sufficient intent to be fraud. Therefore, I am withdrawing the charges. Now, Tim, with all the work I say, and you've referred to that we're doing, we need all South Africans to show that we're facing the same direction. With friends like Mr. Abrahams, who needs an enemy? This, to me, is not bringing the country into disrepute. It's subversion of national interest.
But you know, the intriguing thing about the whole matter is that for weeks, for months, it's not the first time this happens. The minister was given questions in March, or was it just before?
Just before
the budget.
Right.
And then in April, there was another major issue. Then it cooled down a bit, but it continued to be a public issue. What has since been revealed, though, is that the day before, I think you and the Minister Gordhan returned from New York on a Monday, and the announcement was made on a Tuesday. But it's emerged that Shaun Abrahams had met the president and the other ministers at Luthuli House. So one wonders if the discussion about this did not take place there, and whether this issue of charging Minister Gordhan given the context that we've spoken about, was unreasonable on his part, whether that came up in those discussions?
Well, Tim, as we said in our statement after the fraud charges were announced, we did indicate that for us it is worrying, this trend, that every time, just on the eve of major events that the Minister of Finance have to participate in, there are these things. So ours has been more about the institution, the rule of law, transparency, and the integrity of these institutions. These kind of behavior and trends have not been helpful. I have had the Minister of Justice explain that he might not have thought it was problematic to invite the head of the prosecution to come and meet and brief the president on the state of the security state, given the students' violence on the fees issue. And I must say, I think it would be, it is expected that the Minister of Justice would have briefed the president that one of my functionaries will be charging one of your executives. So I don't think there was anything, in my view, untoward if the Minister of Justice tells the president that I expected it would happen. I don't think the president would read in the news. I think the minister will tell him that we're going to be coming on to one of my colleagues. But for me, it was just this trend that these things seem to happen, almost suggesting there is a deliberate intention to undermine the work that we're doing. By the way, that I said is the president who's tasked me and Minister Gordhan to do this work.
Jabu Mabuza is the chairman of Telkom. He's also the leader of Business Unity South Africa. He's accompanied the Minister of Finance, Gordhan, on international trips to try and allay fears, concerns with the ratings agencies as well as investors in many different parts of the world. We'll continue this discussion in a moment.